key to any great relationship is communication. Yet most people fail terribly at it. Now, the thing is, what happens is we go, and this is what happens. You went, oh, but it's Valentine's. So I don't want to have a conversation on Valentine's Day because, I don't want to start an argument. But I think this happens all the time. Oh, well, things are good at the moment. I don't want to have that conversation.
So it's an avoidance.
There's an avoidance. Yeah. And I said to her, please, for the love of God, you know what I'm going to say.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Stuck as Fuck. And today I have the lovely Tabitha Jane, aka the Conscious Love Queen.
Yep.
And we are going to be talking about relationships because that's what you specialise in, isn't it, Tabs? Know you for a few years and I know how wonderful you are and how insightful you can be about relationships. And so you may be questioning why Stuck as Fuck, which is predominantly a business podcast, is talking about this. But when you think about it, what's going on outside of work has an influence on what we're doing in work. So I know you've worked with a few business owners and, sometimes the pressure of a job and running your own business can have a big impact on our relationships. And so that's something that you've been involved with quite a lot. And
absolutely.
Guided people through these types of things. So look, let's start, Tabs. Tell us a bit about yourself and how you got into this line of work, please.
So my background is HR and training, and about 13 years ago, just after my daughter was born, I had an epiphany that I really wanted to be a coach, retrained, sort of fell into business coaching because of my background in business. And then, unfortunately, about 9 years ago, my husband left, and I thought we had a great relationship, we're really happy, and it kind of sent me on my own journey to understand what really happened. And so through that discovery, I also did loads of training around relationships and communication and all that good stuff. And I just felt compelled that I just knew if I could teach other people, so many breakups would be avoidable. And that's what really kind of set me on the path, is helping other people to realise that that isn't the only option. And maybe what are the other things you can do if you are still in love and you do want to still be together, but it's not working, how you can get that to work. And that's really what I specialise in. Actually helping everybody who's just unhappy, whether they're single, wanting a relationship, or they're in a relationship and they're unhappy. It's all around relationships. So that's pretty much what I do.
Fantastic. And obviously, I've been on the receiving end of some of your wisdom. I suppose really, it's going to be a big open question. So we're going to riff a little bit here in terms of how this goes. But what would you say are the main contributors to relationships breaking down? Are there big expectations that men and women have on each other? Obviously, there's single sex relationships as well, but I'm sure that the same applies to those as well. So, what's the sort of the common things why relationships break down?
Great question. In my experience, generally, men and women is perceived quite differently, but ultimately, people stop putting the effort in. And as you say, I work with a lot of business owners, and you put all of your energy into growing your business and getting clients and building your empire, but it's very easy to forget about your partner. And I said, if you even put 1/10 of the effort into your relationship that you do into your business, you'd have a thriving relationship too. So I think it's effort, but also communication. And everyone knows the key to any great relationship is communication. Yet most people fail terribly at it. And why is that? It's because there's a lot of fear. You don't want to rock the boat. There's lots of reasons why we don't share. And I think over time, what happens in any relationship is the time isn't put in. So you just become more distant. The connection starts to get lost. You start doing your own things. And it happens really slowly and steadily. In most cases, it's a gradual thing over many years. And then without the connection, you then stop doing those things together, and then you stop talking about things, and then it just kind of goes on. And the analogy about the frog, you put a frog in boiling water, it jumps out, but if you put it in cold water and then you heat it up slowly, it won't jump out. And that's what I think what happens
until
in relationships.
It boils to death.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's, I think, what happens. Everyone I speak to, there's usually a catalyst. It might be infidelity, it might be just there could be lots of things that happen that's a catalyst, or often a death of a parent, or empty nest, children going off to university. Like there's a few different triggers for things to kind of come crashing down. Yeah.
Okay, so you know, how does this start, and what can people do to actually? I get it. You know, you sort of become, you know, as a business owner, it becomes your the centre of everything. And like you say, it's really hard to get that balance between your sort of your home life, your work life, and so on. So, what are the little things that you know you could give as a bit of advice for people in that situation where maybe they're just noticing that some of those cracks are emerging? What are they likely to start to feel resentful about as well? You know, maybe they don't feel supported. Maybe, you know, and look, I've done a bit of work around this. Nothing to the extent that you have, and I know that this is to do with masculine and feminine energy, and you know, perhaps you can explain a little bit about that. But why people start to feel they're getting bent out of shape because they're perhaps not feeling heard or whatever. What are the sort of the telltale signs, and what are the things that they can do about it?
So I joke about this, but it is true. So this is the version of truth that comes from both parties. So when men come to me, and it's a 50-50 of whether it's a man or a woman who approaches me first, men say, if I'm allowed to say it, it's like, there's no intimacy, we've stopped having sex, or it's reduced, she doesn't do things that she used to do, and she's just nagging me all the time, I just feel completely criticised, can't do anything right. So that's kind of how men tend to feel when the relationship's broken. It's like they're looking at their wives thinking, she's really unhappy and I don't know how to fix it.
Yeah.
And then when women come to me, the usual thing is they just feel unsupported, unloved, and they tend to be resentful about the fact that maybe they're not helping out, maybe they're not showing up, maybe they're not, you know, just available emotionally for her, or they're not doing the things around the house. And often, I always say it's never about the thing. You know, it's like, oh, he doesn't do the washing up, or she doesn't do this. It's never about the thing. When you start stripping it back, it's usually years of little tiny unspoken, unexpressed things that have happened that lead to that.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying about it's a very slow decline. So it's kind of just recognising, I think for women, they just feel a lack of connection.
Yeah.
And for men, it's probably a lack of intimacy. Will be like you're being nagged and not getting any intimacy would be your thing of like, oh, there's something not quite right here.
Yeah, the criticism bit I totally get as well. That's because that can feel like, doesn't matter what I do, I get criticised. And that gets wearing, that turns into the nagging. And what happens when you feel nagged?
Well,
you
then
stay away.
Absolutely. You start finding other things to do, other ways to, to spend your time. Because why would you want to spend your time with someone who you think's going to nag you?
And the truth of the matter is that, you know, men and women, we are wired differently. We see the world differently. And I think sometimes, I sort of hear this from my mates, you know, they'll be moaning about their consecutive others from time to time. It's, why can't they just do this? Why can't they do that? And, you know, I'm no expert in this. And sometimes it's like, yeah, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to get your wife to think like a man, the way that you do. And it doesn't work that way. What are some of those sort of like idiosyncrasies that you could talk about quite, and say, look, for example, women like men to think this way, like, and men like, so what would be some of those things?
Yeah, so if we look at masculine and feminine, which I use the term as in, you can have a woman who's very in her masculine and a man that's in his feminine. So it's not necessarily about gender and sex, but if we just assume for the rest of this podcast that I'm talking about men and masculine, because it just makes it easier. So men generally are very modal. And what does that mean? It means, and you've probably seen the videos of men live in boxes.
Yeah.
So,
compartmentalised, yes.
And very focused. If you go back thousands of years, the men went out and they were the hunter-gatherers. So they went out and they needed to be focused. They couldn't be distracted and they went after that thing. And even though we've evolved thousands of years, our brains haven't really evolved that much and our energy. So what happens is masculine is very modal. So you'll be in work mode, you'll be in home mode, you're in playing a game mode, you'll be in golf mode, you'll be in whatever mode you're in. Whereas feminine is very diffuse. So she's back at wherever back in the day, looking for, checking the kids aren't eating poisonous berries. She's, checking the safety.
So the attention's
everywhere.
Right.
Yeah. So when you just on that difference, that's one of the big differences. You'll tend to find that women say that men don't listen. That's a very common thing, right? And it's not they're not listening, it's just you haven't got them into your box.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about loads of other stuff, but if a woman's going, and again, because our energy is very diffuse, we're going, oh, Mark, so we need to get some shopping and we need to do this and this is happening. And by which time you've kind of switched off. And right at the end, I'll say, oh, and my sister's coming over tonight for dinner. And then you'll get home and be like, oh, my sister's coming over. I told you this morning.
Yeah.
And you're like,
yeah, this resonates so much.
And again, because you want your wife to be happy, because actually that's a misconception. Most men want their wives to be happy. You will normally be, you'll just kind of play along with it.
Be accommodating. Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
And then it just comes a cycle. So often I'll say, if you want to talk to a man, especially if it's anything important, you need him to hear it because there's something he needs to do. You need to get him in your box.
Yeah.
And similarly with women, men will be like, she's all over the place. Like, just get to the point, Whereas women, they won't because there's this like diffuse energy and lots of different things. Like a man will often go to bed and a woman will say, what are you thinking about? And he'll be going, nothing. Whereas she's thinking about what happened with the kids and what she's got to do tomorrow. And or did she put the bins out tonight? And did, our brains almost don't switch off, whereas men are better at kind of closing down than women are. So that's the kind of modal diffuse part. And then the other part is like our drive.
Yeah.
So feminine and women are very much driven to connect.
Yes. Yeah.
And men are driven to win.
Yeah.
So, and that can show up in it's literally in everything. So even when it comes down to, and when I say winning, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It might be like from a problem-solving point of view. You want to solve the problem. You want to help.
Yeah.
You want to do your best.
Yeah.
Men are driven to do that, which is why they don't like criticism. It's the worst thing you can do with a man. So, I've lost my train of thought. I get into one and I'm like,
no, that's okay.
Menopause brain.
No, you the whole thing there was you're just saying that men are in this compartmentalized way of thinking, and we can when we criticize we sort of close down. Women are they've always got all of these things going on in their mind all the time, whereas men are sort of more single-minded.
Absolutely.
I can relate to this. I mean, it wasn't so long ago. I'd actually been invited over to my sister's for dinner, and she was rushing around like she normally does and getting the dinner ready, and we all sat down to it. Like, dinner's ready, I'll sit down and eat. We sit down, and I was talking to her fella, and we was having an in-depth conversation about whatever it was, probably football, it doesn't matter. This is the end of dinner, but we're engrossed in that conversation. In the meantime, she's tidying up and putting things away and so on, and then she comes in with a proper strop on, like really moody, like, why haven't you helped me? You're just sitting there talking, you can see I'm doing this, and my reaction was, why haven't you asked? Well, you can see but not tuned into that. Just
because you're modal.
We're having the conversation and absolutely oblivious to what's going on around us. But for her, she's insulted. It's like, I've cooked your dinner. I can see her point. Don't get me wrong. I was not saying that it was unreasonable. But what she didn't understand was actually we weren't aware that she was clearing up, which was an assumption she had made. But the other part of it as well is, why didn't you just ask? Because there's no issue with going, guys, I know you're having a nice chat, but can you stop? And I think that's a typical example, really, of the feminine and the masculine way of processing information and what's going on around us. And I can imagine that something like that might escalate into, this is my sister I've known obviously all my life, but when it's partners, I can imagine that's the sort of thing that really starts to create problems. How would that sort of transpire? What would be the repercussions of something like that on a bigger picture?
Yeah, well, because it wouldn't be just that. Because obviously, what would have happened to your sister and anybody in that thing is about what do you make it mean. So it's a big thing that I do is, so it's never about the action or inaction or the thing. It's what did you make that event mean?
Yeah.
And in your case, it's the event of you sitting having a chat and your sister doing the washing up. And so she may, and I'm making some assumptions here, she might be thinking, oh, they think I'm their skivvy, or they don't care, or they're whatever.
I'm being ignored.
So whatever that making it mean is, as you know, we all see through things through our own values and our belief systems.
Yeah.
So, I talk about your spouse fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
So if you believe, for instance, your husband is lazy, or if you believe that he doesn't listen, everything would be filtered through that.
Yes.
And then you layer
Delete, distort, generalise,
Then you layer in what we're talking about, and suddenly that small act, if that's being done over and over, because it won't just be the dishes, it'll be homework with the kids, it will be the thing that she asked him to do the other week, it'll be
reinforces.
It'll be lots and lots of things, micro events that happen through every week, month, year. So you imagine timesing that by 5 years.
Yeah.
She's end up hating him.
So it compounds and compounds.
Yeah, it is a compound.
And the resentment
effect.
builds up. Yeah.
Because also, it's never really talked about. It's just the argument about the thing that never really gets resolved.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's where I tend to strip right back. And that's why when I work with couples, I always talk to them both individually first.
Yeah.
Because I want them to be able to express themselves without fear of upsetting the other person. And secondly, I want them to be really honest, and it gives me an opportunity to help them reflect on what's really going on for them and why they're perceiving things the way that they're perceiving them. And that's where you start uncovering previous injustices or stuff that's happened previously in their life that's affected what's happening, their behaviour now.
Yeah.
So it's a very holistic look.
Yes.
Because ultimately, and this is what I say to every couple, he is not responsible for your happiness. She is not responsible for your happiness. You are.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do? And if you're both in that space, then things change dramatically. Because all that time, you're really kind of blaming the other person for how you feel.
Yeah.
And like you said about not asking, because feminine is very, like I talked about men being driven to win, women are driven to connect.
Yeah.
Which is why when we were chatting the other day with Stuart, and he was saying about, I love my wife, but she literally, I come in and she just doesn't stop talking. I said, well, if she's been on her own all day, she's looking for connection. It actually doesn't matter what she talks to you about.
Yeah.
She doesn't want you to fix anything, because men are on high alert. I need to fix this. Whatever she's telling me, if there's a problem, I need to fix it. And often there isn't a problem.
Yeah.
She's just wanting to offload.
Yeah.
And that's, again, where communication comes in. So I say to women, tell them what you need. Just say to him, babe, I need to offload. You don't need to fix anything. So then you go, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'll just relax on this now and, listen. Or it'd be like, actually, I do need your help on this. I want to tell you this thing. Can you help me? And then you know what's expected of you. Whereas there's a lot of assumed expectation. And the best one is, well, we fell in love, so he must know what I need, or she must know.
So huge assumptions, huge underlying assumptions.
Well, if he loved me, it's like, well, you're basing all of those assumptions on what? And have you communicated that? Probably not. Because that's what happens. You fall in love, you're in the honeymoon period, you're all full of those hormones. You're like, oh, I'll do everything for them. Of course I'll go and put the trash out. Trash, how American. Oh, of course I'll go and put the rubbish out.
Yeah.
Of course I'll go and do, you want to make a cup of tea? I'll make you 5 cups of tea. You want a cake at 11 o'clock at night? I'll make you, we're very, very wanting to give.
Yeah.
And then that starts to wear off and it becomes a bit unsustainable.
Yeah.
But then we've created all of that, but we've never had any conversations about boundaries. We've never had any conversations about what we expect from each other. And again, I think because those conversations just don't happen because we're not taught to have them, there's just this whole bundle of stuff that hasn't been talked about.
Yeah. So, and assumptions on both parts.
Absolutely.
So what you just said is, that's some good advice that you'd give to the woman, and that is, look, position what you're going to say before you say it.
Yes.
So, look, I just need to offload, don't need you to fix, and I get that. As a man, I'll be receiving that, and it'll be, right, okay, I need to keep stum and just listen. Mm-hmm. And then I would be absolutely tuned into what's being said.
Yeah.
Unless there's some criticism of me, and
of
then
course.
I'll probably tune out. But that's the key thing. As soon as it starts to go, right, okay, you really haven't done this and you haven't done that, and it feels like nagging, then I am going to tune out. But what's the advice you give to men as well about how to have better conversations with their partner as well, so that they could start to also do the same sort of positioning?
So absolutely, and I think what men need to be aware of with women is, masculine or men. Now this is a sex thing. So men have one hormone. So they have testosterone, and you're on like a 24-hour cycle.
Yeah.
So your energy, albeit depending on if you've eaten and all exercise, all that stuff, is pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Whereas women, and we laugh about that time of the month, but it does actually massively impact women.
Yeah.
So if she's, depending on her cycle, and sometimes women aren't aware of it, but, even Paul has said, I'm really aware, we've got 3 hormones and they do different things at different times of the month. And it's slightly different for every woman because it is about you understanding your own patterns. But I know I've got 2 sensitive days, 2 days before I come on. Like, that's my pattern. And sometimes he'll say to me, are you having a sensitive day? Because that's what I call them. Right. It just means anything you say in those 2 days where might have normally been okay, those 2 days I probably won't be.
So you're hypersensitive.
It will be, yes.
Yeah, okay.
And so
that's when you've got to tread carefully.
Yeah, so then he'll say, is this your sensitive day? And I sort of look at my watch on my phone, I go, oh yeah. So often men can help support women, just understanding that there is such a thing.
Yeah.
And also being more, again, coming back to that, instead of trying to fix, it's kind of a coaching skill really.
Yeah.
Which is, what do you need, babe?
Yeah.
And just listening, sometimes like holding space.
Yeah.
Just, if a man can just connect with her, it might just be over a cup of tea. Babe, shall I pour you a glass of wine? Let's sit and have a chat. Because most women want to connect.
Yeah.
So whatever that connection looks like. So it might be physical.
Yeah.
It might be through a conversation. But whatever you know about your wife or your partner, just do that thing. It goes a really long way.
Yeah.
And she will feel supported.
Yeah. Yeah.
And emotionally provided for.
Yeah, I know you and I have talked about this. I mean, we both read this book, and it's called The Way of the Superior Man.
Yes.
Right? And it is such a fascinating read because it does explain. I mean, it's a more sexualised version, really, of when men are from Mars and women are from Venus. But there's a lot of great learnings in that. And one of those for me was, women are like the tides of the ocean. It's constant ebbs and flows. Whereas men aren't like that.
No, you're quite stable.
Yeah, and again, I'm using men and women as a generalisation. I know it's the masculine and the feminine. And, and we, as a man, I know I've got feminine energy just as much as, the next man. And that can make it, I remember seeing, a few years ago, and it's probably a little bit sexist or deemed a bit sexist, but it's it's got the average man and it's got an on-off switch, and it's got the average woman. And it shows the cockpit of a 747, and you can relate to that a little bit. You go, because sometimes you just don't know the mood. And with my ex-wife, I used to say it's the upstairs downstairs mood, and she'd be downstairs, and 1 minute we'd be having a little cuddle and this, that, and the other, and she'd be perfectly happy. She'll go upstairs. Yeah, and 10 minutes later she'll come down and she's got a face like thunder and something's really pissed her off and I don't know what it is, and then you do the guessing game and you go, well, what's the matter? Well, if you don't know, well, no, I don't. Well, I wouldn't be asking, because I think sometimes we could be a bit more literal as men, and it is that sort of complicated stuff. It's like guess the mood,
Yeah, and men aren't as emotionally intuitive as women. Men are emotional for sure, but it's just not the same. Like if you think about how our brains are wired, like women, we are designed to be childbearing, family creating, and if you actually look at the way girls' and boys' brains are wired, it's different.
Yeah.
So women have that, which is why when your friend comes round, she will notice. She'll pick up the tea towel and just start almost like you'll be in sync and in flow together. Yeah. Whereas men don't.
Yeah.
And it's not because they're doing anything wrong. And I think that's what I love about my work, is appreciating our differences, honouring our differences, rather than seeing it as a personal attack on you.
Yeah.
Understand that's what's going on. Yes, there's lots of layers in there, but if you get that baseline of actually what's really going on, you can start to laugh about it. Like if I had one wish for everybody, it's to bring a bit more fun and lightness into their relationship.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that gets lost, isn't it? And again, I'll pick that up from the book as well, is sometimes what happens is, you can receive a comment, or I could receive a comment, from the opposite sex, or the person I'm in a relationship with. And I could take offence to that. And then how I respond, that's a trigger for me. And then what happens is we're essentially just doing that and butting heads because it gets worse and worse and worse. And the thing is, sometimes it's just to take that as a light-hearted, okay, I'm not going to take anything out of that because it could be forgotten about within minutes. And I want to go back to something you said earlier, and you mentioned the word boundaries, all right? In relationships, I think that's one of the most important things is setting those boundaries. And first of all, when we start out, anyone who's done sort of like the mental fitness programs that we do, PQ program, I know you've done that. One of the things that we do is we understand where our saboteurs come in and what it is that triggers us and what our likely response is going to be. When we start a relationship with someone new, we're much more in that sage space, where we're showing the best of us, our vulnerabilities, and we're really opening ourselves up, and it's much more heartfelt. But after a period of time, that starts to get replaced by our saboteurs. So it's all wonderful. And that's really the time when we do need to talk about boundaries. However, we don't. Right? And I think there's a couple of reasons for this. It'd be great to get your insight. One is perhaps we don't even know what our own boundaries are ourselves until they're crossed. Because we don't know what our values are sometimes. And we just know something's off. Or we get upset about something and because something's been said. So I think there's understanding what our boundaries are and then having a conversation. Once we do know what they are, is having that conversation, but doing it in a safe space so it doesn't feel like it's, these are affairs of the heart, but sometimes what we want to do is put them across in a way where it doesn't feel like it's a business meeting where we're talking about it. What advice could you give around that? How might you have that conversation, fairly early on in the relationship, so assumptions don't get drawn and so that it doesn't create toxicity?
Yeah, great question. And I'm going to use, I'm sure she won't mind, as a very good friend of mine who, I started off coaching her when she was single. And she's been in and out of a couple of relationships over the last few years. And she's in a new relationship. Seems really good. First 6 weeks. And there's just been a couple of little things where there's been just a bit of miscommunication, which is normal. And I said to her, please, for the love of God, you know what I'm going to say. You need to start having those conversations. Now, the thing is, what happens is we go, and this is what happens. She went, oh, but it's Valentine's. So I don't want to have a conversation on Valentine's Day because, I don't want to start an argument. But I think this happens all the time. Well, things are good at the moment. I don't want to have that conversation.
So it's an avoidance.
There's an avoidance. Yeah. And so what I said to her, and I say to other people, is set it up right from the outset, which is every week, it's like a check-in. You can call it whatever you want. Yeah. And it isn't, by the way, this isn't a check-in that's bad. This is like, how are you?
Yeah.
How are you doing? Yeah. Maybe what's gone well. And maybe where do we need to have a chat? Where do we need to have a bit of a courageous conversation about something? And so it is, and again, it is about checking, are you in the right energy? If you've had the hardest week and you feel frazzled, that is not a good time to have that conversation. Yeah. But it might be over a glass of wine on Saturday night. It might be over breakfast on Sunday morning. It doesn't really matter when it is. Yeah. But it is like, do a regular time. Yeah. Every week, that's your time, and you're just checking in with each other, because what happens is you're not thinking, oh, when do I bring this up? Because that's the hardest bit, I think, is bringing it up. Yeah. Whereas if you've got a space that is set aside, and as I said, this isn't about, oh, that's the time where I'm going to tell you everything that's wrong. It's a genuine, how are you doing? What's happening for you as a person? I want to check you're all right, vice versa. Then going, actually, what have we done really well at this week, Mark? Like, what have we really done well at? Oh, do you know what? When you did that the other day, I loved that. So then there's like mutual praise.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point that's missing sometimes. Is, I've noticed, certainly, I think back to my marriage, it was sometimes just the tiny little things that had the biggest positive impact. Yeah, and sometimes when you try to do things that you think might work, and then you don't get the response back. And I go back to what you were saying earlier. It's about the connection. It's the things that create the connection that's really important. And I think that's so easy to lose track of.
And that check-in will create connection.
Yeah, I get
Because you can set it up to be something beautiful. Yeah. It can be something that you both enjoy doing. It might just be a walk. Yeah. Might be a walk, might be breakfast, might be something over a cup of tea. It doesn't have to be long. You might only be talking 20 minutes, half an hour. Yeah. It's just having that micro. So I'm micro dosing your relationship.
Yeah, well, do you know what I get from it? You know, in context, what you're talking about is being fully present for that time.
Yes.
And that's it. It's just being fully present, giving your full attention
yes.
to that conversation and to your partner.
That's it, yeah. Perfect.
Because, you know, again, this is in the book, The Way of the Superior Man, and it says, like, it's better to be present, fully present for half an hour with your partner, right? Fully present. Get rid of your phone, just give them your full attention.
Yes.
Than it is to be a little bit present for periods of time over 4 or 5 hours.
That's right.
It's just, you know, that destroys it because your attention's elsewhere. Yeah. So, look, yeah, I get all of that. What are the common traps, do you think, like especially for business owners, where, you know, you're running, you've maybe started a business, or, you know, it's taking off and your time gets more and more absorbed into that? Obviously, you know, we're working with a lot of business owners and we're giving them coaching around, you know, how to set the systems up, and how to look after staffs, how to manage their own energy. But we don't get necessarily too heavily involved in the relationship side of it. What can they do and again, look, this applies to both men and women.
Yeah,
who are running
definitely.
businesses, you know,
Definitely.
what can they do to make sure that their relationship stays solid? What are the little things that they could do just to make sure that their relationship stays solid and cohesive?
Yeah.
Especially in those early days.
Yeah. So interestingly, I think it's worth mentioning at this point, part of the reason my husband and I split up, even though we had a good relationship and a good marriage for very many years, is when I started my business, I did what a lot of business owners do, and they're just full pelt, single focused. I was in my masculine a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And when you look at love languages, my love language was physical touch and his was quality time. So me sitting there on my laptop, you know, obviously it was many years ago, so it was more Facebook because some of the other social media platforms weren't out. But I'd be on Facebook and he's thinking, I'm just having a jolly. And I'm like, no, this is where I'm connecting with people.
Yeah.
And so he doesn't understand why I'm choosing work over him, because that's how he perceived it.
Right.
And so it's one of my learnings, which is why I think I do work with a lot of business owners, because I've been there, I've done there. Yeah. I got divorced, you know. Did I lose my husband because I started my own business? It's a massive part of it, without having my full understanding and awareness that I do now. And which is why my message is please look after the people at home. Yeah. Because when you're on your deathbed, your employees are not going to be there.
No, absolutely.
Or when you become ill, or if you are having a tough time, that's not where you're going to find solace. It's going to be in your friendships, your relationships, your partner. And so you need to cultivate and look after them, whatever that looks like. And it's just down to time. It's about prioritising time. So you might talk about default diaries and making sure you're looking after yourself, and you've got time planned in for all of your business activities, of course, is super important. But don't work 7 days a week, 16 hours a day.
Yeah.
It's all right in little doses. If project needs to get over the line, it's for a short period. Then make sure, if you say you've done that for a month or a few weeks, that you then have a week where it's a bit more, not necessarily a holiday, but a bit more downtime to be present, like you say, and have that quality time with those people.
No, I know myself as well, just, in my own life, and certainly in the lives of, people that I've coached, business owners, I've coached business leaders I've worked with, that, when things start to go wrong outside of work and those relationships start to break down, what an enormous amount of energy you're going to use, and it becomes guesswork then, trying to fix, again, from a masculine point of view, I've got to fix this, and you try things, and when those things don't work, you feel there's a sense of, I'm not appreciated, and then that's when the resentment builds up. It doesn't matter what I do, I don't get appreciated, and so on and so forth, and that breakdown in communication really starts to happen. One of the first questions I ask any new client I'm working with is, how important is your life outside of work? For those that are married, they'll say, yeah, it's great, and what do you want to do? And I'm doing this for my kids. But it's so common to see people working so hard to think, I'm doing this for my kids, but they missed them growing up, which is probably the most important part of being a parent. For me, I think back to the best times of being a parent, and Harry, my son, is sitting over there doing the production. Hello, Harry. You know, and actually, I was very fortunate because I did make sure that I was very present for pretty much most of his childhood. But there are people I know, and you know, they're working so hard to think about the future, and they're missing that what's going on now, and that's the most important part. What advice could you give for that? Because we're talking about relationships between, you know, the spouses, partners as well. But what about those kids as well? What could be done there?
It's the same thing. It's time.
Yeah.
It is just making sure you're carving out time, which is why I'm such a big lover of default diaries. You know, like you said, better to have an hour of present time than 5 hours of part present.
Yeah.
So it might not be quantity, but it's quality.
Yes.
It's just having those quality moments with the most important people in your life, which are going to be your partner, your children, you know, might be your pets, doesn't really matter. It might be a family, it might be a close friend. It doesn't actually matter about who they are. It's just those significant people that are in your life. Just make sure you carve out time for them and do things. And it doesn't have to cost money. It doesn't have to be extravagant. They just want your time.
Yeah.
That is your most precious asset is time.
You mentioned about courageous conversations as well. Now, look, obviously that's something I do a lot of work about. I do that much more in a business context, okay? Because it's important. We have relationships at work, and we need to have courageous conversations sometimes. How would you frame that up? Is there a particular structure? I know, like, the first thing that you mentioned is timing. Get the timing right.
Yeah.
I've been on the receiving end of someone, you know, trying to have a conversation with me about matters of the heart when my head is involved in something else, and it's just the wrong time, so the response isn't going to be good. So I get that, you know, you set time aside and you say we do this, but what should the structure of that conversation look like?
Yeah, I've actually got a whole document on this.
Oh, great! Because one of the things as well that I know that can really set me off on a kill is or a negative way is when it's assumptions rather than facts that are, you know, well, you've not done this, you've not done that, and it's baseless assumptions.
Yes.
Yeah, mind reading, as I would call it. So how would you structure that? I know you've got.
Yeah, so you're right. It's about setting the conversation up. So like me and my ex-partner used to say, I'd say, right, we're going to have a courageous conversation, and we just knew what that meant.
Yeah.
So it's like timing, our energy, making sure you've got enough time. Do not try and crowbar it in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
If you know you've got to have an important conversation, I think what a lot of people do is like, oh, I've got 15 minutes now. I'm just going to, no, because it puts pressure.
Yeah.
Puts pressure on you, and then you end up leaving it half unresolved, which causes more problems and then makes you not want to come back to it. So there's a lot about timing. The other thing, as I say, is just take personal responsibility. So when you're coming to your partner with a problem, it's how do you have a conversation? So the structure goes something like this. Mark, the other day when I asked you to take the bin out, I noticed you made a bit of a face and then you didn't do it. And then when I asked you later on, you ignored me, like you didn't answer me. Right, so that's the fact.
Yeah.
So you talk about facts. So that's not me saying, oh, the other day, you were horrible to me. That would be the mind read, right?
Yeah.
You were this. It's like, no, this is the behaviour I noticed. So you start with the behaviour. What's the behaviour you noticed?
Yeah.
And then it's, what's the story I told myself? So when you did that, Mark, I felt like I'd had such a hard day and I just felt like you didn't respect my needs. Yeah. And actually you didn't care. And actually, you just don't love me, Mark. That's how it makes me feel. And then it really hurts that you ignored me. Yeah. So although you're saying how you feel rather than you made me feel like this. Mm. The story I tell myself is that you don't care. So you're owning the fact that you're making a story, which may or may not be true. Yeah. 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 And then you say, so, you know, it's like, this is what happened. This is the story I told myself. This is how it made me feel. Mm. And then this is what I'd like to happen next. Yes. And then it's a collaborative conversation. Yeah, yeah. So then and this is what happens when you do it like that. And I've done both. Mm. I've done the, guess what? Didn't get a good response. Yeah. Yet when I framed it like that, it has worked without a shadow of doubt. It's worked every single time. It doesn't mean he hasn't got a bit annoyed. Yep. But he has been a lot less resistant because he hasn't felt like he's being penalised or character assassinated or anything like that. And then we have a conversation about it. And 9 times out of 10, he'll go, well, the first time you told me, I had every intention of doing it. And then actually I forgot because I got distracted. And the second time, I didn't hear you. I literally didn't hear you.
Yeah.
And you know what? I'm so sorry you feel like that, because that wasn't. And 9 times out of 10, the story you told yourself is not what happened.
Yeah, yeah.
And then straight away, and I know we're talking about something really simple, but it applies to
even
the most serious of things.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so if you come from that place, and then you can do the same, even if it's the same situation. Well, when you asked me to do that, what I noticed is you were telling me, not asking me. And because you didn't say please, actually it put my back up. Yeah. Which then made me feel disrespected. Yeah. Same thing, right? Yeah. Two sides of the coin, and you're owning your feeling and she's owning her feeling. And it's like, okay, well, what are we going to do about it going forward?
Yeah. Yeah. How do we communicate better to get the result?
So it might actually realise, oh, crikey, I didn't realise that I don't say thank you. I don't say please. Yeah. And now I'm aware of it, that becomes a thing.
Yeah, yeah. Fantastic.
Now, there is an element of acceptance. So there are things, doesn't matter how many times you tell your partner, they're probably never going to do it. Yeah. And that's where you have to decide if that boundary is a deal breaker or not. Is that boundary a deal breaker? Is the fact they don't put the toothpaste top back on the toothpaste, is that a deal breaker? Yeah. You know, and again, I'm using very silly little examples.
No, but I get it.
It might be other things.
Yeah, I get
it's like, is the fact that when he goes to the pub, he's just not able to only have 1 pint, has 3, and almost never comes back before 10. Is that a deal breaker? Yeah. I don't know. For some people it will be, and for some people it won't. And that's where you need to decide whether it is or it isn't, and then communicate that. If it is a deal breaker, then he or she's got a decision to make then of whether it's important enough for me to change that behaviour or not.
How would you advise someone to get clear on their own boundaries if they don't know them? Because I think what happens is, as we mentioned earlier, we start to discover when they get crossed, but wouldn't it be much more helpful, you know, especially in a newer relationship, to be aware of what our boundaries are at the outset so we can communicate them rather than wait till they're crossed?
I think it depends on experience, because actually if you don't have any experience, you're not going to know where your boundaries are. But that can be like an ongoing conversation. But if you have a bit more experience in relationships, then you just got to think back, well, actually, what haven't I liked in previous relationships? Yeah. What are the things that have triggered me? What are the things that really are my pet peeve? What are those things? Yeah. Because we'll know the stuff that's happened, but we won't know the things that haven't happened. So like when I do like values elicitation, so especially around relationships, sometimes I'll go, and is there anything that could happen that if it did would make you not want to be in the relationship? Yeah, yeah. And it might be, they'll go, well, obviously if they cheated, well, obviously, but they haven't said anything about trust, or they haven't said anything about fidelity. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So I think sometimes we also we do know them, but it's so assumed that everybody would do or not do that thing that it doesn't even become
spoken about. Yeah. Interesting. What would you say as well? I mean, obviously you've had a lot of experience in this. What would you say the number one reason for the infidelity would be in a relationship? Why would that likely to? And again, I don't know. I think there's always an assumption that men are more likely to do that than women are. Is that accurate?
I would say in all my fidelity cases, it probably does weight more towards men, but women have too. It's definitely not one-sided. Definitely not. And you tend to find men have had a physical affair and women have had an emotional affair. Because I know women who they haven't even necessarily been intimate, but there's been an emotional affair.
The connection.
Yes.
They want that connection,
so if you think about it, like I think you and I have chatted about it, about intimacy. So feminine need to feel connected in order to be intimate. Not always, just generally. Yeah. And men need to be physical to create the connection. Yeah, yeah. So that's why a man can come in and slap your butt and go, hey, I'm ready. And she's like, well, I've just had the hardest day in the world and I'm not ready. You know? how does he do that?
Yeah.
So she needs to obviously look after herself and get into a good, and also make that connection. So it might be she needs to chat, she needs to talk about her day before she's ready to do that sort of thing. So I can't remember your question, but
well, it was why would it lead to infidelity?
Yeah, I think it's loss of connection. You know, I always say to couples, it's not that I condone it, but there is always going to be some responsibility on both parts, even if it's not necessarily 50-50, but there is a co-creation always.
Yeah.
And it's not, it's the symptom rather than the cause.
Yeah.
You know, infidelity it's not clear cut.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I condone it or they shouldn't do it, either party, but it does happen and there are reasons why it happens. But generally, the person doesn't feel, ultimately they're not getting their needs met in the relationship.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line.
I think that's it. That's what I've taken from it. So it's not saying someone's going to go and do it, but the contributing factors to it happening are going to be there's been a loss of connection. That's generally what it is. And whether that's a physical or an emotional, it's going to be something's dropped, you've not discussed it, you've not sorted it out. Yeah. So therefore, a likely outcome is there's going to be some level of infidelity somewhere.
Yeah, it could be. Or you're just horribly unhappy. And for me, intimacy is what distinguishes between you and your friend. So it doesn't matter what level in intimacy it is, I believe it's a really important component.
Yeah.
And that's why I always say, make sure you kiss your partner every day.
Yeah.
Because it's the first thing to go.
Yeah.
And so if you can keep that real basic...
Are we talking a little peck on the cheek, or are we talking a snog?
No, I'm talking a snog.
A proper snog, yeah. Okay.
Once a day, find that time to have that moment. You talk about PQ reps.
Yeah.
That moment to be completely present with your partner.
Yeah.
Obviously there are couples that don't like doing that. So find something, it might be a hug.
Yeah.
Some physical intimacy is really, really important.
Or a wedgie, maybe.
You're a wedgie, yeah. Some people play, whatever. It doesn't matter what it is, but
a bit of slap and tickle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But intimacy, you need it. You absolutely need it, and it's so easy. It's so easy to do, but it's so easy not to do.
Yeah.
And if you think about life, it's about habits.
Yeah.
You get up. Most people wouldn't dream about starting their day about brushing their teeth.
Yeah.
Or having a wash, or whatever.
Yeah.
There are certain things that we do, and I think the relationship stuff is a part of that. They're just habits. And the other big habit, and when I have couples that are struggling, one of the first things I get them to do, depending on how bad it is mutual appreciation.
Okay.
So every single night, depends who they are and what stage they're at, but I get them to find 3 things that they can be grateful for and that you express it to the other person.
Oh, right, yeah.
And a few couples often say, but we don't really understand why we're doing it, so we're not doing it.
Mm.
And so I talk about how your reticular activated system, I said, because ultimately, I said, if you know every single night you've got to think of, especially because I try and get them to think of different things, so not just saying the same thing.
Yeah.
You just, it's like you review your day and you go, what were the things I can be grateful for or that I love about them?
Yeah.
And suddenly it just changes the landscape of how you feel.
Yeah, well, it's like doing any sort of gratitude exercise, isn't it? It can just reframe the way you think.
But for each other, because what happens is every single day I'm looking for something to be grateful for, and then guess what? I'm looking.
Yeah.
So I'm constantly looking for the positive instead of looking for the thing that actually irritates me about them.
Yeah.
And it just changes your perspective. So for me, like having time to have your weekly check-in and daily appreciation and daily intimacy, if you did those 3 things, unless you're fundamentally incompatible, you'll have a great relationship.
Fantastic. Tabs, this has been really insightful. We're out of time. What I'd like to do for our listeners and our viewers is how can they get in touch with you if they're going through some problems with their relationships, or they feel that this could be an issue, especially for our guys that are business leaders, perhaps got a lot of pressure with what they're doing and noticing some cracks. How can they get in touch with you, and what does that look like?
Probably the best thing is to get me on LinkedIn, Tabitha Jane, or just email at tabitha@tabithajane.co.uk.
Fantastic. All right. Tabs, as always, a very insightful conversation. Thank you very much. And that's it, guys. Thank you very much for this week's Stuck as Fuck. Look forward to seeing you next time.